In today's video, we're going to talk to Tom Glenn to see how he got started with JavaScript, the world of game development, and what he's actually going to talk about in the upcoming JSGamedev conference, which is happening on September 28 and 29 online. Tom is a software engineer and a game developer with a passion for creating and sharing educational content with 15 years of experience in the industry. He has honed his skills in Unity, Unreal Engine, and Godot. As the lead engineer of Heroic Labs, DevRel team, and the creator of a popular YouTube channel, Code with Tom, Tom will be actually speaking at the GS Game Dev conference on September 28 and 29. So, Tom, can you please tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Isam. It's great to be here. So like you mentioned, I'm a developer. I've been a developer for 15 years at this point. Feels like a very long time. I think I started back in 2008. I initially was a web developer, so I got my foot in the door as an ASP engineer way back when,
Oh,
and my career's sort of gone all over the place since then. I did a lot of .NET. I've worked at a bank, digital agencies. I've worked in simulations using Unity, and yeah, my latest is DevRel position at Heroic Labs, and they're obviously the creators of the open source Narcoma game backend. So I do a lot of documentation, project samples, bunch of different stuff like YouTube content there, and yeah, get to do cool things like this. So this is kind of my dream job at this point. I've been able to move away from the boring web development banking side of engineering, and it's something a bit more entertaining, a bit more creative, which is always good.
awesome. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Tom. It's great to have you here. It's great to meet you virtually. And yeah, it would be great actually conducting an interview with you today. So, Tom, as a great game developer and having so much experience in the field for so many years, can you please share us with us a memorable moment from your journey as a game developer?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, I haven't been a game developer for the entire journey there. Game development is something that I've kind of done on the side ever since I was very little as a hobby, and it's something that I've been incredibly passionate about and wanted to move into for a very long time. But I mean, in terms of a memorable moment, obviously I haven't worked on any AAA titles. I've never worked in an actual game development studio as such, but I've always dabbled on the side, and I think the most memorable thing for me, and probably the reason why I initially got into game development as a hobby, as a creative outlet, is when I was about 14 years old. I sort of stemming back from that original, the origins in web development for me. I was heavy into PHP at the time when I was about 14. This was when I sort of started to dabble in programming as a whole. But I was fascinated with online games, and particularly at the time, the web was becoming a real big thing. People were getting access to it in schools, and one of the big things there was these browser-based text-based online RPGs, and they were, you would log in. I think people call them MUDs. You would log in, and you would have, you create a character, but there was no visuals to it, right? It was all just text-based, and they struck a real chord with me. So I ended up creating my own one. It was called Tuimorx. It had a very strange name. I don't even know where that name came from. But yeah, I created this on my own when I was about 14, and it kind of took off back then. I mean, we had, relatively speaking, we had 2,000 members, active members playing the game, and it was a lot of fun. It was enjoyable to make. I mean, I still have the code, and I occasionally I boot it up with an Apache server and MySQL, just to kind of remind myself of what it was. And I mean, the code is horrendous, right? The code is terrible, but it's something that I always look back on fondly, and it's something that I'd love to recreate now that I have a lot more experience, a lot more skills in the field, and yeah, I'd love to remake it as an actual game that has some visuals at some point. I have numerous sort of open projects with that code name, with the Tumox code name, of various states of development. But yeah, it's something that it will always sort of stand out to me as the key moment where I was like, you know what, this is a really enjoyable thing, and I'd love to get into the game development side of things. So yeah, I mean that's for me is the big one.
Yeah, that definitely sounds awesome. I think most of thing or game developers I met before, they are all like feel the same feeling when they remember their first game, especially back in
Absolutely.
the days and this yeah, old JavaScripts and web games and those online little teeny
Yep.
tiny
Yep.
games. That's yeah, that's definitely enjoyable. So speaking of which, and speaking of games, could you like highlight a recent project or a game that you have actually worked on and tell us exactly what actually made it that special?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, recently I've been heavily involved in Godot engine, as you mentioned at the start, and it's something that, particularly during lockdown, I found myself getting involved in quite a lot. I used to use Unity and Unreal Engine, but Godot really sort of stood out to me as this open source engine, and I kind of ended up as part of learning that whole thing. I ended up creating the Code with Tom YouTube channel, and that allowed me that then to share my findings, share tutorials, and various things about the Godot engine. And as part of that, I mean, one of the things that came out of that was my position at Heroic Labs, but also I have had the opportunity to work for a platform called Quiver, and Quiver has basically stemmed out of the lack of professional quality courses for Godot, if you like. And as part of that, I created two courses for them. One was a game called Raptor Run, and another one was called Curse of the Tomb. Now, Curse of the Tomb, I got the chance to work with an incredibly talented guy called Matt Dye. He's a 2D artist, and we put together a 2D side-scrolling action game in Godot 4. And that project took probably about 6 months to create. It included a bunch of different things like, advanced platforming mechanics. You've got Coyote time in there. You've got sort of input buffering. There's an upgrade system, so your character can sort of, progress as you unlock certain skills in the game. You and the ability to like dash and do a bunch of other stuff like telekinesis attacks. It was really, really a fun project to work on. And then out of the back of that, we created a course for Godot 4 to try and teach people everything that it takes to actually build a game. It's great having access to tutorials on YouTube and being able to go and say, well, how do I implement a character controller? How do I implement an inventory system? But there was nothing really that was cohesive, and took people from the very start of of their journey on the Godot engine, and then all the way through to actually creating what could possibly be a fully released game. So that's something that I've worked on in the last sort of 6 months. It recently came out. I did a video on my channel just sort of promoting it, and the response has been fantastic so far. People are really enjoying it. So yeah, I guess that's one of the highlights of things that I've worked on recently.
Oh, that definitely sounds cool, and I think especially with being like a YouTuber and sharing the game dev like findings and getting feedback from the community is definitely great just to create like awesome games and actually awesome projects. So that's definitely a win-win. So when we speak about game development, we know that there's too many things, too many factors in a game. So we would definitely love to know how you stay up to date with the latest trends and technologies in the ever-evolving world of game development.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, as you mentioned, it is continuously evolving, and new trends in terms of games that are popular or particular features. They tend to come in waves, and yeah, it is difficult to stay up to date. I mean, I personally, being on the YouTube platform itself, I consume a lot of content on YouTube. I mean, everything from devlogs to particular tutorials on specific features, but also there's a lot of channels out there that also cover game industry news, and that's kind of my primary source, if you like, for staying up to date with things. I tend to keep tabs on the big major blogs, so the Unity blog, Unreal, Godot. Their sort of blogs are sort of staples of my daily reading. But yeah, Twitter again is also a big thing for me. I'm on Twitter all the time. I don't post as much as I probably should do, but I like to keep tabs of what's going on in there. And particularly, I sort of focus less on the AAA side of the game industry and more on the indie development side. And seeing what projects people have going on there. And it's always good to see, what people are working on, because I feel like that sort of gives you that trajectory of where the games industry is going. I know there's a lot of stuff going on at the minute around the Unity stuff, and it's just interesting to see people's takes on various things within the industry, particularly on Twitter itself. But yeah, for me, YouTube is my main source for inspiration and developer logs and seeing where people are going, and then just keeping tabs on the major blogs. I don't tend to go off and read a whole load of stuff because my time is very limited. But yeah, they tend to be the main ones.
Yeah, I think definitely Twitter is a perfect resource for any technology sort of nerd or guy, whether
Yeah.
game development or web development or anything. I definitely agree with you. I'm a big fan of Twitter too, even though I don't post that much either. But I think, yeah,
Yeah,
people should
sure.
open more Twitter tabs nowadays. Yeah. So, Tom, it would be actually great if you can like share with us a lesson or an insight you've actually gained from a past game development project that actually helped you in your current work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the huge one for me, and this is something that I struggle with on a daily basis, is managing the scope of a game project or any project in particular. But since we're talking about games, I think it's a huge one for particularly indie developers who might not have a full team surrounding them. A lot of the stuff that I do is individual work as a solo game developer, and for me that idea of you come up with this idea for a game and it could be something huge, right? It's this big dream project that you've got going on in your head, and being able to execute that as a solo developer is incredibly difficult unless you have a limited scope, right? Unless you have really refined what that game idea is, establish what that core gameplay loop is, and then just try and prune that down to its bare minimum, just so that you can get that out of the door. Because one thing for me in particular is I have this dream. This dream game is for me is a big sci-fi game, right? I'm very inspired by games like Elite Dangerous, The Longest Journey, which is an adventure game, but it's set in this sort of cyberpunk themed environment. And of course, with the latest Starfield out as well, that's a huge inspiration for me. And this sort of idea of this giant evolving sci-fi world is something that I would love to make, but as a solo developer, it's incredibly difficult to try and pull that off, right? I mean, you look at Starfield, that was in the works for, I don't know, something ridiculous like 10 plus years, with a team of hundreds or thousands of people working on it. So I think it's that idea of being realistic about your time, about your skill set. I recently worked on a project. It's called Magic and Muskets, and it's a sort of like a Diablo style boss rush game, if you like. It's isometric, it's 3D, it's top down, and it began really well. We me and Matt actually, who I mentioned earlier on, we started this project together, and we had all of these cool, crazy ideas for different arenas that you could play in, and we progressed quite far with that initial concept. But we quickly realized that 3D was neither of our skill sets, if you like. He's a traditional 2D artist, and I'm a engineer. So the idea of being able to animate and model and texture and lighten and all this other stuff quickly became very apparent that that was not our skill set. Now, that's not to say you can't go off and learn those things, but it's just being aware of how much time, investment, things like that will take, and whether or not that's actually going to limit you in your ability to actually create a finished product. So for me, I guess if there's any lesson I can share, it's avoid scope creep, make sure you're realistic about your goals, and be prepared to invest the time in whatever various skills that could potentially be completely unforeseen at the start of a project. That's not to say don't chase your dream game. Absolutely do, but just try and be a little bit more grounded when you approach it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a valuable lesson, and what I find like in the game industry particularly, actually a lot of indie developers look up into these very huge AAA games like Starfield, as you mentioned, or I don't know,
Yes.
games
Yeah.
made by Rockstar or something. It's
Yeah.
just crazy. I think they should just have a little less expectations and look more into like the indie side of the game development because that's what's going to actually suit them more, unless they want to actually join
Yes.
like a AAA like team or something. So that's definitely a valuable lesson, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's difficult to get it's difficult to get out of that mindset of, I'm going to create this huge all-encompassing game. It's something that, game developers in particular are extremely passionate people, right? And it's difficult because typically we have these huge imaginations, we have these huge worlds, we're inspired by a lot of things that we see, and we don't often think about the limited time that we have as individual people, and how much resources went into some of these titles, like you mentioned, like GTA, for example. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but it's hard to curb that sort of appetite for that huge game. But it's definitely a lesson that I'm trying to take on board more now as I approach different projects.
So Tom will be actually a speaker on the next GS Game Dev conference, which is the biggest conference about game development. So we would all love to know more about like the talk of you, Tom. So can you like tell us more about what are you actually going to talk about at the GS Game Dev?
Yeah, no problem. So, my talk is basically it's all about social features and social engagement within games. So we've seen a huge trend recently, particularly in the mobile space, where games are making this push to be more involved in that social space, get people competing, get people talking about games together and playing as a collective group. And we see this with things such as Candy Crush Saga, Royal Match, and all this sort of stuff where it's no longer acceptable really to just have this game in isolation. You want to be able to invite your friends, you want to be able to compete on a leaderboard, you want to be able to do all sorts of things like having private messages and group chats and guilds and so on and so forth. So my talk's really about how or what impact that can have on, for example, player retention, monetization opportunities, and how practically we can implement that in your JavaScript games. So obviously, I work for Heroic Labs as part of the developer relations team there, so I have a lot of insight into how people can use Nakama, the open source game backend, to implement some of these features. Now, Nakama is a hugely popular backend that provides you with the ability to implement all of these social features in your game extremely quickly, extremely easily. And so my talk, rather than being very sort of theoretical and talking about the pros and cons of how you might do this, and trying to explain some of that stuff, it dives very quickly into the practical aspects of things. It shows you how to implement, for example, leaderboards in your game, and yeah, so we dive into some of that. So I think it's going to be incredibly useful and valuable to people that are either starting their game development journey right now or have an existing project but don't really know how to start fitting some of these social features into their games. Hopefully, it will provide some insight there into how to get started with that.
So Tom will be actually speaking at the next biggest game development conference, the GS Game Dev. You can actually catch up with us and actually be part of the talk on jsgamedev.com happening on September 28th and 29th. Looking forward to meet you online. So Tom also has actually a really awesome YouTube channel that actually like has everything about game development and the game dev world and Unity and Godot and Unreal Engine and much, much more. So it would be actually great if you could just look at this channel. It's called Code with Tom. You can find a link in the description below, and Tom can actually tell you more about it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Yeah, so like I say, I created this during lockdown, and I kind of took a step away from it for a while, but I'm back now, and I basically have a lot of Godot content on there. I'm starting to create some more Godot 4 content. I'm hopefully the sci-fi themed game that we mentioned earlier on. I'm going to be creating a multi-part series, relatively unfiltered. It's not going to be tutorialized. It's going to be a lot about me just going through that journey of becoming or being a game developer, really, and just sort of showing you that unfiltered highlight reel of of how that gets done. So yeah, if you want to come over and join the channel, I have tutorials on there and industry news about the game development industry in general. And yeah, it'd be great to see you guys over there.
Awesome, awesome. Great talk, Tom. It's been actually great having you today on the interview. You've been like a great guest, great knowledge. We know about now. Thanks for sharing all this information about the game development. It's been really, really fun. So yeah, thank you, Tom.
It's been
Thank you
great to
guys
be
for
here.
tuning in today. And yeah, nice to meet you too. Yeah, catch you hopefully in the next video. See you guys.
Cheers,
Peace.
guys. Take care.